Well, welcome back here. Let's start on the Great Depression. Quite an important aspect of America and how we changed dramatically during this time period. So, essentially, what causes this Great Depression? There are a myriad of factors behind it that goes back all the way to these various panics that happened, uh, like 1893. Then you had, World War One, debacle after that, and then we have the Roaring Twenties that causes this immediate uptick in availability for credit. So basically, there's a couple of things that occurred during that. So farmers were hurt by overproduction and a decline in global trade and the lack of bimetallism, or not getting the 16-to-1 ratio of silver like William Jennings Bryan wanted. It causes basically a meltdown, a global meltdown here, especially in America, in part because of credit and the too easily availability of it, and then it not having anybody able to give them credit. So this premeditated this thing called the market crash of 1929. And it's here that immediately after that, you see bank failures happening right and left, which ultimately decreases the confidence of the American people in the economic system, because capitalism basically needs to have Americans spending money or investing that money. And if all that money has been sent away, basically, disappears, there isn't the loaning and selling of money in order to begin creating greater industrial power. So here's an example on the left-hand side of how this Black Tuesday emerges, and you can see how it's such a precipitous drop down here. It's almost similar to what happened, not too long ago, for those of you who follow Bitcoin, and how it had such a meteoric rise to it, and then it had a major fall to where it had a dramatic amount of loss of value. So what did this result in? A president at the time, um, you know, uh, he was basically a laissez-faire type of guy. He believed in the trickle-down theory of economics, that it'll eventually get better if it let it fix itself. He argued that's the cycle of capitalism. You have ups and downs, and during those ups and downs is the job of the government to be hands off and not get involved with these economic crises. And so what resulted in is like almost 25% of the population was without work. Now, if you go to other areas in the deep South, it could have been 70 to 80% of people without work. And so in the major urban cities, shanty towns began emerging, like one in Seattle, um, downtown Seattle, ironically, the same place where Starbucks main world headquarters are. Shanty towns were built up where people lived out of makeshift cars, makeshift tin houses, wood house, whatever they can build, they built, made. And they call these Hoovervilles in honor of a president that many felt did very little in order to alleviate the hardship and pain that this stock market crash had created. Well, what was the New Deal, and what caused this New Deal to emerge? Well, good old Franklin Delano Roosevelt uh, stood in direct competition with Hoover, and Hoover didn't provide any answers. FDR promises this thing called the New Deal, which he really couldn't articulate what it was, but he was arguing, America, I'll give you a New Deal if you vote for me. And so it was his policies and prescriptions for addressing the Great Depression. So at least he came in with optimism, came in with ideas, and literally within his first 3 days of office, he began making changes within the banking industry. His New Deal focused on the three R's. You must know these things, at least one or two pieces of evidence within each of these programs. So it had relief from the immediate problems that people are experiencing, whether it be no jobs or to no food. Then you had recovery, about how can we help the major institutions of America to get returning back in the correct direction again. So everything from banking to the industrial aspect to the farming needed to have some degree of changes. And then you had reform, that let's not ever let this happen again. And so what could American politicians do and the legislative branch do to keep that from taking place is reform. And so we needed to make reforms to various institutions there. So, for instance, one of them is the FDIC, which we still use today. Basically, in modern day banks, they are promised that up to $250,000 deposits of every set account will be guaranteed by the bank. And so here you see the running joke is that the bankers get to kind of spend the money how they want because there's IOUs in every vault saying, well, the government's going to back it up to 250,000 because that's what this insurance plan does. What is this meant to do? Is this meant to build confidence amongst the American people that the banking system is secure and is intact, and to start putting your money back in the banks and don't fear this ever happening again with your money being taken away. You have the Glass-Steagall Act that basically was put into place so that way banks couldn't sell like things that were very volatile, like stocks with no backed up verification and evidence. And so they basically, this Glass-Steagall Act went in and tried to separate banking system from that of financial institutions of investment. Okay. And so this stayed in place for the longest period of time. In fact, it wasn't until George W. Bush II that this kind of got put back on the burner. I'm not going to get any further on that. Just be mindful that many of these reforms stayed with America for the longest period of time. Well, what were some of the criticisms that happened during this time? Well, there were plenty of them, plenty of them. Well, to simply define it, there were conservatives that criticized the New Deal as an extreme overreach of federal power. For instance, here Herbert Hoover was president prior to this that spoke of a reason why we need to abbreviate as much presidential power that has happened. That's what laissez-faire is meant to do, is to curtail reaches of power. But FDR felt in a moment of crisis, we need to have a president that's going to make solutions rather than excuses. And so he is the one single-handedly who helped the presidency attain a great degree of power during this time. Well, what was also, there were some critics, the name was Huey Long, and this guy here was actually going to run against FDR, and he was give me a moment, down in Louisiana. I think he was the governor of Louisiana, and while down there, he had some pretty radical ideas. He says Social Security shouldn't come from the people's pockets. Social Security should be funded by the wealthy. And he argued that tax should be about redistribution of money, not have these different codes that the wealthy get to find ways to hide money and poor people keep paying more for it. And so the Supreme Court basically struck down some of the things that President Roosevelt was trying to do, namely the National Recovery Administration, as one example of that. They also criticized the New Deal for not going far enough to help the poor and the unemployed. That would be Father Coughlin, who was a Catholic priest, and said, you didn't go far enough. It didn't touch all aspects of society, just a few percentages of it. And there's a court case here that does warrant a little bit of some examination, the Schechter Poultry versus United States. And simply during this time, President Roosevelt was cherry picking different industries, forcing them to pay their workers at a certain wage. And then he, a demographic, that's not the right word, but across the entire United States, he made sure that all industries in certain areas paid the same amount. So that way, those in Idaho made the same amount, those in California, et cetera. Well, since the president was able to cherry pick industries so that way he felt would be bettering to the American people, he was imposing some other regulations on some companies that it wasn't warranted. So maybe it was important for the president to control coal and the coal mining, because we needed the coal not only to heat but also to keep fueling our industrial machines. But chickens and poultry, what does that have to do with the Americans and such? And so basically the Supreme Court voted in favor of the Schechter family and forbade the president from just cherry picking different people that he thought warranted some degree of curtailing of their businesses in their power. So ultimately, what this means, the president had his wings clipped, so to speak, and he was forced to abide by what the Supreme Court was telling him to abide by.